Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Our focus is on Sudan. As the civil war between the rival generals continues to intensify, the United Nations Security Council has extended an arms embargo on the warring parties in Sudan's Darfur region. The resolution was adopted unanimously by the 15-member Council on Wednesday. In 2023, the permanent members, like China and Russia, abstained the last time the embargo was renewed, but this time they voted in favor. The resolution renews the sanctions regime in place in Darfur since 2004 and now extends it until September the 12th, 2025. Now, these sanctions are aimed solely at Sudan's Darfur region and do not apply to the whole country. They will restrict the movement of arms into the region, where the fighting has particularly intensified in recent months. It will sanction individuals and entities contributing to or complicit in destabilising activities in Sudan. Such an embargo was first put into place in 2004 during the genocide carried out by Arab Janjaweed fighters against the non-Arab ethnic groups in Darfur. Janjaweed fighters make up elements of today's Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. It is the paramilitary group fighting Sudan's armed forces since April last year. The RSF has captured most of Darfur. In a battle that has been ongoing since May over the North Darfur's capital of Al Fasher, which is the only Darfuri region capital not to have fallen to the RSF.
The United States thanks Council members for their constructive engagement in renewing the Sudan sanctions regime for 12 more months. Right now, the people of Darfur continue to live in danger, in desperation, in despair. Every day, they are faced with intensified fighting and restrictions on humanitarian aid, persistent human rights violations, and mass displacement. This adoption sends an important signal to them that the international community remains focused on their plight and is committed to advancing peace and security in Sudan and the region.
Sudan's envoy has welcomed the extension, but he urged the Council to go further and sanction the entire Rapid Support Forces. Sudan's envoy also accused the United Arab Emirates of backing the RSF and profiting from the nation's natural resources. Sudan's military has repeatedly accused the UAE of supplying the RSF with arms and ammunition smuggled in through neighbouring Chad. A report by the United Nations earlier this year also said that there was substance to these reports. However, the UAE has strongly denied the accusations, calling them baseless. Last month, Sudan's army also backed out from the US-led peace talks in Geneva because the UAE was invited to participate. Without the army's participation, the prospects of a ceasefire have dimmed in Sudan. Meanwhile, the human rights group have called for sanctions on the whole of Sudan. They have called the embargo renewal on Darfur a missed opportunity by the Council to extend the embargo on the whole nation. Sudan is facing a massive humanitarian crisis as a result of the 17-month-long war. Thousands have been killed and more than 10 million people have been displaced. The United Nations says 26 million people are in crisis levels of hunger. There are also reports of sexual violence and other human rights violations. Now, for more on this, we have with us Moses Crispus Okello, a senior researcher under the Horn of Africa Security Program at the Institute for Security Studies. He is joining us live from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Alison.
Now, what are the primary reasons behind the United Nations Security Council's unanimous decision to extend the arms embargo on Sudan for another year?
Thank you once again, Alison. Indeed, on the 11th of September, the United Nations Security Council decided to roll over the sanctions regime for Sudan, affecting individuals and entities that are involved in arming the different factions in Sudan. I think that rollover is an acknowledgement that the situation in Sudan is still dire. There's lots of violations going on, and something needs to be done to end the conflict, including first and foremost by stopping the flow of the arms that are fueling this war. Indeed, this decision also comes on the back of yet another UN investigation. It comes on the back of a report of the UN panel of experts, which found that there were egregious human rights violations committed in Darfur, and most of those violations are committed by the arms. So there are various reasons why the Council decided to roll over the sanctions, but most importantly, it's an acknowledgement that that there is some need to do something slightly differently.
Yes. And Moses, in your view, how effective has the arms embargo been in curbing the flow of weapons into Sudan, particularly in the Darfur region? And what challenges still remain?
I'm afraid, Alison, the geography of Sudan is not one that is amenable to effective arms embargoes. Sudan sits smack in the middle of a gun smuggling corridor that stretches from Mogadishu to West Africa on the one hand, and on the other from Libya to South Sudan, both of which are countries that are awash with especially light weapons. So geographically, the position of Sudan does not lend itself to this kind of mechanisms of controlling arms flow. And that's partly the reason why the different fighting groups in Sudan have been able to access weapons, from Libya, from Chad, from Sudan, and even from their international backers. So in short, this embargo is important, but it's not nearly enough to stem the flow of weapons. And this is a challenge that the region as a whole and the international community has to continue grappling with.
Yes. And on that, how do the international actors, including the neighboring countries, as you've mentioned there, and major powers, influence the enforcement and the effectiveness of the arms embargo?
Unfortunately, again, this is the two different angles to this. On the one hand, the major powers, or at least some actors among the major powers, are the ones involved in selling arms clandestinely to the different factions in Sudan, or at least if they are not, they are condoning such sales by consorting with some entities, for instance, in the United Arab Emirates, in Iran, that are involved in selling these arms. So there's an extent to which the international community, or at least countries in the international community, are complicit in arming Sudan. On the other hand, the borders of the countries that border Sudan are so porous, and the countries that border Sudan are incapable of managing their borders, that it's almost impossible to stem the movement of arms back and forth. So unfortunately, there's very little that the countries and the international community can do to stem these arms. But that doesn't mean that it's not an important thing to do. Right.
Moses, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued analysis and insights on the latest out of Sudan.
Thanks for having me, Alison.